Greetings, my dear viewers. It is I, Drahjan, back once again with another Dungeons & Dragons homebrew video. Today we are talking about a very underutilized mechanic in Dungeons & Dragons, at least from what I have seen. The Exhaustion mechanic. No, this is only from my perspective that it's been underutilized because I have not seen it used in either of the campaigns that I was in. Now, Exhaustion, I actually find interesting. Some people might say that it's harsh to use Exhaustion, but I see potential in it. Not only in a different way of killing your players, but to use as roleplay potential. What I mean by that is, as written here, some abilities and environmental hazards, such as starvation and long-term effects of freezing or scorching temperatures, can lead to a special condition called exhaustion. Exhaustion is measured in 6 levels. An effect can give a creature 1 or more levels of exhaustion as specified in the effect's description. And it lists a couple of levels. If a already exhausted creature suffers another effect that causes exhaustion, its current level of exhaustion increases by the amount specified in the effect's description. A creature suffers the effect of its current level of exhaustion as well as all lower levels. For example, a creature suffering 2 levels of exhaustion has its speed halved and has disadvantage on ability checks. An effect that removes exhaustion reduces its level as specified in the effect's description, with all exhaustion effects ending if a creature's exhaustion level is reduced below 1. Finishing a long rest reduces a creature's exhaustion level by 1, provided that the creature has also ingested some food and drink. And this is the part where I actually like it. You need to be able to long rest, or use greater restoration apparently, to decrease your levels of exhaustion. Which I think is grand. This gives you as a dungeon master some opportunity to roleplay, or give your characters role-playing opportunities for their long rests. Which, if you're playing a more grittier game, using gritty realism, then you have a lot of time to work with. And your healers would have a little bit more to work with, and not just be healers during combat, but healers outside of combat as well. Now, the only problem that some people have is this part right here, where the levels of exhaustion, as they increase, the abilities add on. I think this is awesome. Because if you were to gain more and more levels of exhaustion, the abilities just stack. The effects are really amazing. Anyways, how do we utilize exhaustion more? Well, the exhaustion rules can be found in the Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master's Guide, and in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, as well as Rim of the Frost Maiden, under the natural hazard of avalanche. But our main focuses are going to be on the Player's Handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide. I will explain these rules, how to utilize them, and finally we'll get into the homebrew that I have for you to utilize Exhaustion a little bit more in a sneakier way. Alright, so the first thing we need to talk about is travel pace. Travel pace is another mechanic that a lot of Dungeon Masters don't seem to use, from what I've heard, and solves a lot of issues that Dungeon Masters seem to have. So using a travel pace actually helps a lot with this issue. And I have provided a table that is also provided in the Dungeon Master's Guide. The travel pace table assumes that characters travel for 8 hours in a day. They can push beyond the limit at the risk of exhaustion, which is really interesting. The saving throw, by the way, is a Constitution saving throw at each hour after the first 8 hours of travel. Its DC is 10 plus 1 for each hour past 8 hours. So, honestly, not that bad. A failed save results in the character gaining 1 level of exhaustion. It's not a bad mechanic. Again, this should be utilized a little more often. Little more risk in the game, I feel. Now, there are other mechanics that you can use with the travel pace to make it easier for your characters to gain exhaustion. For example, difficult terrain and high altitude increase the time it takes for a creature to go through the required miles and time. Swimming utilizes the travel pace mechanics, but lost my train of thought. I'll just read the quote. Unless aided by magic, a character can't swim a full 8 hours per day. After each hour of swimming, a character must succeed a DC 10 Constitution saving throw or gain 1 level of exhaustion. Characters with a swimming speed can swim all day with no penalties and uses the normal forced march rules, which we just talked about a minute ago. Another thing you can use is Encumbrance. The Encumbrance rules are pretty good. And this also decreases a character's speed. So it is a lot harder for characters to travel, making it easier for them to get exhausted, which I find pretty neat. I mean, you'll have to keep track of it, which is a little extra work, but it will be worth it when characters start to panic about these exhaustion levels. Next is food and water. Now, food isn't that bad. It's water that is interesting. Quote, a character needs 1 gallon of water per day, or 2 gallons of water per day if the weather is hot. A character who drinks only half that much water must succeed on a DC 15 Constitution saving throw, or suffer 1 level of exhaustion at the end of the day. A character with access to even less water suffers 1 level of exhaustion at the end of the day. automatically. Now, the interesting part comes in if a character already has one or more levels of exhaustion, the character takes 2 levels in either case. Speaking of taking a drink. Alright, number 3 is going to be weather. In extreme cold, this utilizes travel as well. At the end of every hour of travel, a creature must make a DC 10 Constitution saving throw or gain 1 level of exhaustion. In extreme heat, the DC is a 5 at the end of the first hour, but increases by 1 for each additional hour. So if you're out there for 10 hours in the heat, that's going to be a DC 15. Creatures that fail saving throw gain 1 level of exhaustion as usual. Now let's talk about the homebrew, which this first one I'm calling Cold to the Touch. If you have seen my first homebrew with the Succubus's Draining Kiss, you know that I love this exhaustion mechanic. And we're going to use that Succubus a little bit more, because you can actually improve the Succubus by giving it levels in Wizard. And this is why Wizard would actually work. Because of the spell Simulacrum. And the reason why I want to homebrew Simulacrum a little bit is this here. The components. Most importantly, ice and snow. It's because, I quote here, the duplicate is a creature partially real and formed from ice or snow, and it can take actions and otherwise be affected as a normal creature. Made with ice and snow. This has potential being used by a succubus perfectly. Especially the homebrewed Draining Kiss that I mentioned in that previous video. Now, what is the homebrew exactly? Well, in this homebrew, being grappled by 1 or more simulacrums produces the same effects of the Frigid Water Wilderness Hazard. Now, according to Frigid Water, a creature can be immersed in frigid water a number of minutes, equal to their Constitution score before suffering any ill effects. Each additional minute requires the creature to succeed a DC 10 Constitution saving throw or take 1 level of exhaustion. I'm sure your gears are turning right now. You probably just figured out why this would be perfect for a succubus. Imagine, if you will, your party encounters a succubus. That's scary enough on its own, especially with the homebrew that I have presented. But imagine the look on your players' faces when a second identical succubus just appears out of the snow and ice. Now, your bard would probably love this, but the rest of your players would want to nope out of that situation. And that is because of this mechanic. It'll be a whole lot easier to kill off characters using this little exhaustion mechanic that I have created. Especially since the succubus's draining kiss that I did in my homebrew utilizes exhaustion as well. So imagine your bard getting quite the surprise when these succubi give him a literal cold shoulder. The next one I want to go over is blood loss. Now, the Kobold Press already has a mechanic for this called bleeding damage. Quote, bleeding damage is cumulative. Target loses an amount of HP per round for each bleeding wound it's taken. Now, I don't have the full mechanic. I only got a snippet of it from one of the creatures in the Tome of Beasts, I believe. Now, that's fine and all, but there is more to blood loss than just losing a little bit of health. You lose too much blood, and you're going to feel similar effects to dehydration. So, here is my little home brew mechanic for this. If bleeding has not stopped after 6 rounds, the creature must succeed a Constitution saving throw or gain 1 level of exhaustion. The DC is equal to 10 plus the number of bleeding wounds the creature has taken, plus the number of rounds the creature has been bleeding past the original 6. If the bleeding continues after a number of rounds equal to 6 plus the creature's hit die, the creature automatically takes 1 level of exhaustion at the end of each round. So say your wizard is bleeding badly after 6 plus its hit die 6 rounds of combat, then there's going to be some automatic exhaustion levels being added. So that, even with high HP, your wizard will fall if the bleeding isn't stopped. Alright, it's starting to get a little noisy where I'm recording, so I'm just going to go ahead and end it here. I was done anyway. So, until next time, viewers, I do hope you enjoyed. If you want to see more Exhaustion homebrew, make sure to check out my Succubus's Draining Kiss video. In that video, I actually have a story at the beginning, narrated by our editor, V. Completely narrated, along with some voice acting from him. So, make sure to check that out. I hope you've enjoyed. Until next time, this has been Drahjan, and I am offline.